Welcome to Flâneurs, a podcast where Matt, myself, and Sanjari get together and talk about the things that have piqued our interest over the past week. This week, we're going to start talking about some of the things, actually it's a continuation from last week, some things that I thought of and then started seeing online. But before we get there, I want to go kick to Teresa. So you see a new face here. Teresa is, actually, she's my coach. And I've invited her on because this is a topic that will suit her expertise very well, and I think she'll add a good dynamic. So Teresa, you want to tell us a quick bit about you?
Sure. Hi, happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm an EQ executive coach. Basically, I teach people about emotional intelligence, hold them more accountable to showing up in all of their glory.
Brilliant. Like we do.
And thanks for joining us. And I can attest to, and maybe Matt can too, because we were talking before we started the recording. Matt has experienced me before and after Teresa. So there's a difference. So last week I had talked about, I did this analogy about when I was in the shower, I was thinking about athletes and being uncomfortable. And then Sanjari had said, well, oh, I need to start the timer. And Sanjari had said, oh, that sounds like an American thing. I don't think it is an American thing. I think it's a human thing. And then later I saw on LinkedIn, Gary Vee posted this thing and he said, tolerance for discomfort used to be the norm. Today it's a rarity. And that kind of ties into some things that Susan David says, right? She has this great TED Talk. And in this TED Talk, first she starts by saying she has hundreds of people that come to her and say that they don't want to feel. They say things like, I don't want to try because I don't want to feel disappointed, or I want this feeling to go away, or potentially you could even throw in there, I feel uncomfortable. And she says, I understand you have dead people's goals, which I think is hilarious. There's a laugh in the talk. And she says, you don't get to have a meaningful career or raise a family or leave the world a better place without stress and discomfort. Discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. And one other thing that I saw that came up, and these should be displaying on the screen, is Amy Edmondson posted this little quadrant where she has performance standards on the x-axis and psychological safety on the y-axis. And essentially low performance standards, high psychological safety is the comfort zone. High performance standards, which you might say could make you uncomfortable or lead to discomfort, with high psychological safety is the learning zone. So how do we get to this place of discomfort? And if discomfort is normal and we're operating in psychological safety, what does that mean to us?
Are you flipping that over to Dan? I think we should.
Oh, you want me to flip? I will flip to Teresa.
It's such a big question. And I think there's so much to explore. There's so much opportunity of things to explore here. And sometimes speaking from our own personal experience can be helpful because it's relatable. And so I think about, am I comfortable in discomfort? So all of those challenging emotions and challenging situations, do I feel uncomfortable in them? And I'm like, yeah, I am. And I know why I am as well, because I can look back to my childhood and nobody saved me. So my parents didn't swoop in and save me from hard things. In fact, they pushed me to do hard things. My grandparents also didn't save me. My teachers didn't save me. My friends didn't, like, there weren't people around me that saved me from hard things. They were certainly there when I was encountering something difficult for conversation and encouragement and support and reminders of like, why do you want to do this? And what are your strengths? And what have you done in the past that tells you could do this? So as an adult, when I reflect back and think, why am I okay in uncomfortable things now? It's because I could look at that history and go, oh, that's why. And for me, when I look at today and talk to people today, it's often because those things didn't exist for them when they grew up. So they didn't learn that they were going to be okay in discomfort. And they also didn't learn that their value wasn't attached to achievement. So a lot of times we learn values attached to achievement. And if I'm afraid of not achieving, then what's my value? So how's that for a kickoff?
Amazing.
Yeah, going back to childhood. I mean, so that makes me think about like my childhood, my parents, I think I have to go back to this Gary V thing, because it just feels it feels a bit Gen X. It feels a bit like, I don't want to say hey boomer because we're not boomers, but like this thing about when people of a certain age, maybe our age or maybe the one below us now, I was chatting to a millennial before, can't even say it, and he was moaning about Gen Xers, not Gen Xers, Gen Zers. But this thing about going like this thing doesn't exist anymore, as if to say, because it did, my generation know it, and I just think that's cobblers. I think we need to catch ourselves on. I think Gary Vee needs to catch himself on when he says that, and we have to be careful of that, because I think actually a lot of generations after us have got it really hard, are like permanently uncomfortable. It's like I sort of feel like we've known a lot more comfort, and we know the difference a bit. And then when we sort of like make these off the cuff remarks about people don't know discomfort like I know discomfort, I think it's just a bit selfish. But like Teresa, you're talking about like from personal experience that inform you, and I think that's a better perspective to have, like, actually inviting other people to instead of speaking on their behalf, how you inform, what's your personal perspective on this? And I think that's a better thing to do than make these generalizations. I think about people anyway.
I mean, for me, just to clarify, so Dan mentioned, I kind of alluded to the fact that it was an American thing to, dealing with discomfort, leaning into discomfort. That's a theme that's often thrown around, right? And what I meant was really, it's a cultural thing, right? It's a cultural thing. The way people, mention discomfort or, bring it into conversation and, are able to just sit around like we are and actually have a 30-minute conversation about it and broadcast it, right? That's not something that's akin to different countries or different cultures. And culture for me is about values. And so I love that. I can't remember who it was, but somebody mentioned, the sort of value of achievement being attached to your values, right? And so that's what I meant, like you go into a lot of these organizations where we sort of help or try to help. It's, you're trying to build something with a larger group of people, right? And it's like, there's an achievement that comes with that. There's a sense of we need to go do this together, right? And so that sort of conversation around discomfort and the safety necessary to lean into your discomfort, right, is very much tied to that ultimate purpose, which is, getting our products, people to buy our products or thing to sell or whatever. When you take that on a broader level, then the way I deal with discomfort is very much tied to, my childhood and, how I had to handle that, which is for me, for example, moving in like, I don't know how many countries and changing schools and, at a very rapid pace, right? In a very short span amount of time. And that was something that became a badge of honor. So, that's why I think, again, it's just to circle back, I think it's tied to, again, to culture, which is very much about our values, and our values are intrinsically tied to, our experiences, our background, our childhood, and then trials and tribulations, et cetera. So
I think I see that. I think where I want to go back to something Matt was talking about Gary Vee and making this statement. I actually think it's reinforced by it's a similar observation that Amy Edmondson had when she put up her 2x2, right? Because she says people come to her and they say, we can't do this psychological safety stuff because we have high performance standards. And she goes, oh, no, those two actually play very well together. And so what I get out of what Gary Vee is saying is not so much about, I do see that it could be a generational thing, like the older generations, oh, they don't have it. But I also think back to a conversation I had with a research professor I know at Florida State. We were talking about doing some research in the area of my company, Optuman. And he used the phrase safe space, and he goes, I'm sorry. He's like, I really hate this word, this phrase, because, it's so, it has some bad connotations. And I said, well, I don't have bad, I think that's a good thing. But I think people believe safe space means I can't be uncomfortable, or I can't have feelings of I disagree, or like I have to feel good about myself and I have to feel very positive and happy all the time. And I think that gets to those, back to something that Susan David had talked about like if we're masking over the fact that we have emotions and we always show up in a happy state, we have this false positivity. Or some people may call it toxic positivity. There was a thread on that at LinkedIn, right? That we might have, we're papering over it. And so we aren't actually giving ourselves the space to feel the actual emotions and to deal with reality. And so I think that might be the message, is that it's not, the discomfort is, we try and get rid of it because we want to feel safe. And I think it's a misinterpretation of psychological safety.
Teresa, do you use that? Do you, like, because you'll in your professional work, you coach executives and things like that, and so like executives feeling safe or creating environments of safety is a big thing, is a big topic. But when you're, if you're coaching an executive, and do you use that sort of, do you say to them sort of like, right, this is a safe, so to say to them, it's in here, it's okay to feel, to let out all your things you would out there feel uncomfortable about, so go to your discomfort in here?
I don't use that
No.
phrase. I don't use that specific phrase. We actually
No.
talk about judgment more than anything else. So we talk about how do you create a judgment-free space? So how do you show up so you're not being led by your master judge and judging everything and giving off that vibe? And also, how do you show up so that you're not reading people's intention as they're judging me? And so I will now behave either violently against their judge or silently. So I might get really postural in the conversation, or I might actually shrink and withdraw from the conversation. So we talk a lot more about judgment-free spaces, which for me, I use psychological safety, because that generally that's what's happening is, when we're not psychologically safe, we're judging a lot of what's going on. We're making assumptions and predictions ahead, as opposed to perhaps giving generous assumptions of intent. And when we are in a judgment-free space, we actually get an opportunity to ask more questions about what people are experiencing in the moment, instead of just assuming what someone might be experiencing. And so the conversation is much more fluid and dynamic.
Yeah.
When we're in that kind of a space, because we're not just talking about like the agenda or the topic at hand. We're talking about that. We're trying to move forward on whatever our goal is in this particular space, this particular meeting. And then we're also noticing cues, and we pause to talk about the cues that we saw, just to make sure whatever that cue is isn't getting in the way of our work. And if it's getting in the way, then we have to address it, and then we can move forward.
Yeah. Can I ask you this as well then? Right. So, and this might, all three of you now might tear me apart. So I struggle with that thing about judgment-free, and I'll tell you what. So what I do think is that we have to nullify the judgment and the emotions that come from judgment. So what I've often said is, like, to people when they're worried about that, is like, let's just agree that we're all judging everyone all the time. You can't be if you're not judging, because like you're judging body language, you're judging how people are talking, you're judging pitch of voice, you're judging your environment. It's like think, well, actually, and we should probably give a nod to this as well. Like, God bless Danny Kahneman, who died this week. But in sort of like thinking fast and slow, like all the time, we are urging ourselves to think fast to survive. So there's always judgments. And then I suppose, like in thinking fast and slow, it's about, right, what I want to do is engage my reasoning. And so I'm going to be vulnerable, you're going to be vulnerable. I'm going to dampen my judgment and catch myself on, allow you to say things, allow ourselves to interact, and not let my fast brain spring to any incorrect judgment. So I sort of like,
I agree with that.
I lean into the judgment. I sort of like try and it's the same thing, I think, and some people probably react very differently to it. I don't. No, I want it. I want you to say, they might even just think, I want you to tell me it's judgment free. And me saying like, well, no, judgment's everywhere all the time. Let's just be okay in it. you know, they might not get on with that. So I suppose it's a gamble. But I wondered what you thought of that, what anyone thought of that. But,
I agree with that, Matt. And I think that's part of where the discomfort comes in some of the work that I do, is because I'm saying it's a very similar message and people are like, oh, but I'm not comfortable. Like, I don't feel comfortable in this space where I'm exposing my judgments or where I'm being inquisitive about it. And I'm thinking about that and I'm exposing my sense making, which is what I talk about, right? Is I want to expose that sense, because we all see this, we have this, there's this world that happens and we put our sense making on. There's emotions, there's your judgment based on stories and your past and all of this. That to me is all, if you treat it as data and you just say, hey, I'm noticing that I'm reacting this way and I'm judging you, or I'm judging that statement as this. And you can externalize that and say, I'm hearing this and I'm making that judgment. It allows a conversation about it, as opposed to, I'm going to think about this and judge you, and now I'm going to react because I'm being judgmental. I'm going to come at you in that judgmental way. It allows me to detach myself from my judgment. My judgment is a thing that happens. It's data. Just like my emotions are something that happens. Like, I can't control whether something makes me happy or sad. Like, the emotion happens, and I need to pause and say, okay, I'm feeling this thing, or I'm judging in this way, or I'm telling this story. Let me pause. Let me maybe even externalize it and make it clear for everybody what that looks like for me. And now let's have a conversation, because that's been externalized, and as opposed to just in my mind.
I mean, that's why I love your tagline, Teresa, which is, you know, you walk in with emotional intelligence, because I think ultimately that's what this is all about, right? Just how do you develop that emotional intelligence, which for me starts with self-awareness. You can't develop any sense of emotion if you don't have a level of self-awareness, which allows you to process all of these different things and habits and behaviors that you've accrued over, you know, decades or years and years of, you know, dealing, you know, with yourself and the environment, and how you navigate both of those, right? So I think, you know, it's just like muscle memory. Like, you know, as an athlete, going into a sports analogy, like, you develop to kick a ball or swing a bat, and it becomes something that just becomes, right, natural, right? And I think it's the same thing with just developing your own self-awareness and how you navigate. Okay, should I take a step back? Should I stay within myself? Should I actively listen more? Should I just shut up? You know what I mean? Like, and that's something that you develop, I think, over time. But you have to be aware that that's something that's an objective that you have, right? And that you're willing to be uncomfortable as you do that, right? And so going back, that's why, you know, that's why I think that sometimes we have these sound bites from the Gary V's of the world. And I think they're well-intentioned, but they make these very complex journeys within ourselves seem sometimes very mundane and very like, hey, I had this goal and I just leaned into my discomfort and I figured it out. So lean into your discomfort. It's almost like like an infomercial, right? So it's not that simple, right? We're all, you know, going through different stages in life, different things, all these different parameters outside of what people may see on the screen here, right? We all have lives outside. And so how we navigate that to have that sense of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, all these things, to then work on these things, that's tough. And it's even tougher trying to teach that that art, right, to a client, a group of people, an organization. So
it's a good point that you're making around how we could take something really small and blow it up into something really big, because we become triggered by it, and we're triggered by it because it makes us uncomfortable, because we attach some sort of meaning to whatever was said. So whether it's a 2-sentence Gary V, or someone in a meeting says something about my idea, and I notice that I'm emotionally triggered by it, and now I'm uncomfortable in the emotion that's been triggered, and so I have to act it out in some way or another. Flexibility and independence are two really important skills within sort of our emotional intelligence realm that allow us to deal with discomfort, because it's going to stretch us. One, independence is reminding ourselves to be emotionally separate from other people's actions. So what someone else does, if I want to integrate and make it about me, I can, and I'm going to suffer under making it about me, usually. And flexibility is the capacity to adapt my emotions and thoughts when circumstances change. So I could be in a meeting working with a group of people and we're operating so well together. We're collaborating, we're innovating, we're having these dialogues, discussions, we're even arguing and disagreeing, but it seems to be going really well. And suddenly someone does something that tips over that line of agreement. And another person responds wildly. And it can be so fast that we move from we're okay and cruising along to we're suddenly not okay and we're at a dead stop. And flexibility is one of those stress management tools in our emotional intelligence toolkit that really helps us to handle discomfort, because it forces us to look inward and go, I'm creating my discomfort. They're not creating it. I gave what they did meaning. I create my own discomfort, which also means I can create my comfort if I change the internal climate, which change my thought, change my belief, change the meaning that's been attached to it. But you can't do any of that if you're not paying attention to yourself.
Yeah, my
I'm
wife.
curious, Teresa.
So I was just going to say about that. My wife.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Talks a lot about, to me, and I don't know what she's talking about to me, but she talks about like regulate. She does it to the children as well. I'm sure she does it to people she works with. And I think listening to you describe that, Teresa, it's a similar thing. Like, learn to be able to regulate your own emotions, take a beat, don't react, level it off, and reason it through, and then start to, because I think you get back on that even keel quicker if you can do that, I suppose.
Maybe, but I think you can also stay in the discomfort of it. So I could check my emotions and also know my anger is valid, because what they just did is valid of what I'm creating as far as my internal, and I'm going to address it. So I'm going to emotionally express to this person with the weight and gravity that's needed so they understand, don't do that again.
Yeah.
And so like emotional intelligence, I don't think is, well, I don't think it isn't. So I could be as confident saying it isn't, not just that I don't think it isn't about making everything smooth. That's not what emotional intelligence, it isn't about me always being in a space of well-being and being happy about everything that's going on. And, always making a generous assumption and following through with the generous assumption and sweeping things under the rug that are uncomfortable. It's definitely not about that. It's really about being able to be in any emotion and still be able to function.
I like that.
Those emotional states. So going back to Susan David's thing that I talked about, discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. Like, those emotions add meaning. If we think back in time, and heck, one of my earliest childhood memories, I was 3 years old, and my mom loves to tell this story about how I traveled. I'm 3 now. We're at a beach and there's lifeguard towers, and I don't know, like a quarter mile apart or something. Pretty far. I was 2 or 3 lifeguard towers away when she eventually found me. And what I remember about that in my mind is I was walking along, and then all of a sudden there were a pair of legs and red shorts in front of me. And then I turn around and there's another pair of legs and red shorts. And then there's a circle of legs and red shorts, because all the lifeguards they had heard there's a little boy lost. And so they encircled me. And then my mom comes like through the legs and picks me up. And so but that was a very like, it's meaningful, and it stays in my mind because of that. Right. But Teresa, I wanted to go back to something that you talked about. Like, so you're in a meeting and it flips instantaneously, right? From we're going along, everything's okay, now it flips. I'm curious, if I'm in that situation, if you're talking to someone, they say, I'm in this situation, Teresa, what do I do? As a person that's observed this flip, it just happened. What do I do as someone maybe not tied up in it? I'm just on the team.
I'm just on the team. So sometimes it depends on your culture. So if your culture is one that is not power driven, then that would mean everyone in the space has an opportunity to quote unquote lead in that moment. If your culture is power driven, it might be really hard for someone without any authority to do anything in that moment. I think that's just the reality of sometimes our workplace experiences. So if I have no power, I generally recommend, when I'm coaching people in that space, they're like, I keep trying and I can't do anything. I'm like, okay, so then your responsibility is to you and maybe the people beside you. Like, that's your responsibility, is to the people that are shoulder to shoulder. So you can manage yourself in that moment. So you can keep yourself in status quo. You can take that time to meditate, get your breathing right, get your thinking right. Like, just be ready for if anything comes your way. but you don't have to actively engage in those kinds of things. You can choose to be a healthy bystander in that moment. You can choose to act without speaking. So I've walked out of meetings before. Any of you walk out of meetings before where you're just like, this is not good, I'm leaving. And when you're ready to be good, I'll come back. So
walk 2
we can
feet.
demonstrate culture. We can demonstrate what's written on the walls in a lot of different ways as individual contributors. And I suppose if we talk about risk tolerance, those are moments when you choose, what is my tolerance level here for what I'm willing to risk in my behavior in a meeting that goes off the rails. If I have, so I was gonna say, if I have power, then I think anyone with power in that room has the responsibility to set it right. And if they're not, then they shouldn't have the power.
One of the devices that I've used when I haven't had the power, but it can establish some sort of reverse sort of power, is because I genuinely feel like everyone really wants to be like that person who's kicked off and has probably thought, oh God, I've kicked off now. I've gone beyond. Oh, I'm going to double down now just to prove that I'm right about this thing. They generally, I think, inside them, they want to be kind. And sometimes in those dynamics, I've just created I really like giving them an opportunity to be kind then that takes their focus off the thing that they're railing against and try and diffuse it by going, like, well, over here's some way now you can reassert what a nice person you are. So, like, oh, can you help me with this? Or actually, we're struggling over here with you. You'll be able to help us, and just try and get them out, get them regulating again, get them out of that thing. That's what I've sort of done in groups. I don't know if anyone else has got any other devices. I suppose.
What's for me? There's an overarching ingredient. Because as people listen to this, they're going to try and place themselves in different situations, similar or, that they were in. I think the overarching ingredient is what the hell's going on in the environment? Is it budget time? Am I dealing with a divorce? Like what's going on in that immediate environment in that room or outside the hallways? Or, are people getting let go? Is there a merger coming up? Right. What's going on in the environment of the people around. And that allows you to sometimes, if you have some of that context, it allows you to make better decisions, right? And if you oftentimes don't have that, that's when you will stand your ground or feel like, I need to make a point or just simply walk out, like you said, Teresa. So I think that key ingredient is the environment and I think that's part of self-awareness, right? Is how am I constantly trying to dial in? And obviously you can't, right? You try to be as aware as possible, but that environment for me is a huge factor, and I think sometimes it gives you the green light or the orange light or the red light to just, and sometimes it's right, our contract. At least for me, sometimes like, am I willing to risk this part of that risk tolerance? Am I willing to risk this for, and make a stand and be exemplary or whatever? But
so we're at 3 minutes, and what we had agreed is that the last 3 minutes we each get a minute, but we have 4 people, so I may have biffed it by we have 4 people. So let's call it. We're going to go over anyway by a little bit. Let's try as short as possible. Let's do. Let's try and do a quick summation. Final thoughts. I'll kick first to Matt.
Okay. Vulnerability and psychological safety. It is. It's great to talk about it because it is absolutely essential. I think we need to do a part 2 because we didn't even go into how that impacts things like trust. But I think we were implicit about it. But it would be nice to be explicit about it and really go through that. Maybe if Teresa's willing to come back. I'm sure she's got a lot to say about that. So yeah, that's all I've got to say on that subject. Who's next?
Plus one to that. Go ahead, Sinjiri.
I mean, I love the fact that going back to culture and if you look just throughout the world, or how I think this is becoming very much a hot topic, right? It's becoming an allowed conversation, kind of. People are less sort of scared to put it on the plate because there's a lot of podcasting, documentation, conversations being had around it. It's still not being articulated, I feel, properly to be properly understood in its all its complexities. But I think, I'm super happy that, we're going to have a part 2. So that's said. And that we're, ourselves on that path to discovering more about this, because I think it's a very much needed conversation for our world. So off to
I'll give it to
maybe.
Teresa. Yeah.
Yeah.
The last time, the person with the topic closed. So let's keep that pattern. Teresa, you to close out for you.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with comfort. If we're talking about comfort and discomfort, there's nothing wrong with comfort. As like an endurance runner, not every single one of my runs am I hurting and in pain and mentally suffering and trying to go faster. I do a lot of comfort runs. They're intentional. They're really to maintain a status quo around fitness. They're to give my joints a bit of a break, my heart a bit of a break, and yet they're intentional to my overall fitness. And then when I'm ready for discomfort, then I do know I'm growing. I'm getting faster. I'm getting stronger. I'm mentally more tough. And everybody needs to define where their edges are on those things, how to be and when to be in comfort, how to be and when to be in discomfort, and maybe cut themselves a little bit of slack when they're not always in discomfort. It's not a necessity to be a top performer all the time in discomfort. It's a necessity to sometimes be pushing yourself, and maybe sometimes more than a C performer.
Yeah, I love that. A great way to close out. And I'll, for my closeout, I agree. I think that's an important point, is that we need to be both in discomfort and in comfort. And we need to be able to have those self-care moments of the comfort and to maintain the status quo. I do still believe in part of what Gary Vee had posted about in his big letters, where the bigger your goals, the bigger your tolerance for discomfort needs to be. I think that's true. And I've seen that in my life personally. And I believe that discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. And the one thing I'll end with is my tidbit of, if you're in that moment and something is broken down in a meeting, for me, I think that's where something that Sanjuri and I learned about in our cohort together was this Cantor 4-player model, and this role of a bystander in a conversation. So the power of just recognizing what Teresa said, right? To say, I recognize, I observe that we were humming along and now we're in this place. So you can either just stop there and observe it, or you can take it the next step and say, what do we all think we need to do to get back to the place where we were in that humming state? And so there, you could play it a couple of different ways, but just that power of observing it brings it out into the open to have the conversation. So I will end with my tidbit. And with that, thank you for joining us today on Flâneurs at the Flâneurs Cafe. And we'll see you again next time.
Cheers.
Yay, yay.
That was super fun.
And cut.